The sharp crack of the judge's gavel echoed through the courtroom, cutting through the murmur of the audience. The heavy wood struck against the sound block with an air of finality, commanding silence. Judge Richard Coleman adjusted his glasses, his gaze settling on the woman standing at the defendant's table. His expression carried the weight of years spent presiding over cases he deemed frivolous, and this one, by the look of it, was no different. He exhaled slowly, his voice firm and edged with condescension. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone a measured mix of disbelief and dismissal, "you truly believe you can take on an entire financial institution? And let's be clear, you're not a lawyer, are you?" He let the words hang in the air, watching for her reaction. Naomi Carter, standing tall despite the heat of scrutiny, met his gaze without hesitation. The room was thick with tension, an unspoken expectation that she would falter. But she didn't. Across the courtroom, Edward Langston sat comfortably at the plaintiff's table. His three-piece suit was impeccable, his silver cufflinks catching the light as he adjusted his sleeves. His expression was one of practiced amusement, a man who had seen countless challenges like this and crushed them all before lunchtime. A smirk curled at the corner of his lips as his attorney, Daniel Whitmore, leaned forward, tapping his pen against the desk. "Ms. Carter," Whitmore said, feigning patience, "would you like a moment to review your contract again? Perhaps you overlooked something, or maybe we should break it down into simpler terms for you." The courtroom chuckled, a low, murmuring wave that washed over Naomi. She felt it, the weight of their mockery, the dismissiveness in their voices. This wasn't just a case to them. It was entertainment. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Naomi had been waiting for this moment. She had spent months combing through every page of that contract, dissecting every clause and loophole, and she had found something they never expected. But before she could speak, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a creak. A hush spread through the room as all eyes turned toward the interruption. A man stepped inside, clutching a worn leather briefcase. His suit was slightly rumpled, his tie askew, but it was the document in his hand that made the air shift. He moved swiftly, determination in every step, his gaze locked onto the judge. "Your Honor," he announced, voice steady but urgent, "I have evidence that must be entered into the record immediately." Edward Langston stiffened. His fingers, which had been leisurely resting on the desk, clenched ever so slightly. Naomi saw it, that flicker of unease in his eyes. Judge Coleman narrowed his gaze. "And you are?" The man handed a thick envelope to the court clerk before turning back to face the judge. "A former employee of Summit National Bank," he said, "and what I have here changes everything." Langston's jaw tightened, his grip on his pen turning white-knuckled. His confidence wavered, just for a moment. Judge Coleman exhaled sharply. "We will take a recess." He struck his gavel once more. "Court will reconvene in 20 minutes. Naomi barely heard him. She was still watching Langston. He knew. She had him, and the tables had turned. "But before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you." 6 months earlier, Naomi gripped her phone, staring at the banking statement in disbelief. She had been scammed. Naomi sat at her kitchen table, staring at the email notification on her phone. Her heart pounded with excitement as she read the words she had been waiting for. "Your mortgage application has been approved." A slow smile spread across her face. This was it, the beginning of something real. Her own home, a place she could finally call hers. For weeks, she had combed through listings, compared neighborhoods, and visualized every detail of her future. And now, with the help of Summit National Bank, she had secured a mortgage to purchase a modest yet charming 2-bedroom condo in a quiet neighborhood. She had done everything right, read through the contract, asked all the necessary questions, and ensured that the terms aligned with her budget. There was nothing to worry about, or so she thought. Months passed, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Naomi enjoyed decorating her new space, carefully choosing furniture and small touches that made the place feel like home. She paid her mortgage on time, kept track of her expenses, and followed the financial plan she had laid out for herself. But one evening, as she reviewed her latest bank statement, something felt off. a charge she didn't recognize. She blinked at the screen, scrolling through the breakdown of her payment. The mortgage was there, just as expected. Property taxes, check. But then there was something new, an adjustment fee that had never appeared before. Her first reaction was rational. Maybe it was a one-time mistake. She made a mental note to call the bank in the morning. But then it happened again and again. Each month, the mysterious charge grew, inching up little by little, like a slow-moving tide threatening to swallow her entire financial stability. The money she had set aside for home repairs, savings, and emergencies was dwindling. She checked the mortgage agreement once more, flipping through the pages she had carefully reviewed before signing. There was no mention of an adjustment fee, no clause that justified these unexplained charges. Her stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. The next day, Naomi walked into the local branch of Summit National Bank. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint aroma of printer ink as tellers greeted customers with polite, rehearsed smiles. At the customer service desk, a man in his mid-40s adjusted his tie and greeted her with a carefully curated warmth. His name tag read, Martin. "How can I assist you today, ma'am?" Naomi slid her statement across the desk. "I need to understand this charge on my mortgage bill. It wasn't there before, and I don't remember agreeing to anything like this." Martin glanced at the document, tapping at his keyboard. His expression remained neutral as he scanned her file. "Ah, yes, that's an adjustment fee associated with administrative processing. Completely standard." "Standard?" Naomi frowned. "I've been paying my mortgage for months, and this never showed up before. Where in the contract does it say I owe this?" Martin's smile didn't waver, but there was a slight shift in his demeanor. "It's all in the terms and conditions. These adjustments are calculated based on—" "Where?" Naomi cut in. "Can you show me the exact section in my contract?" Martin hesitated for a fraction of a second before smoothly recovering. "I'd be happy to escalate your concern, but I can assure you this is common. If you'd like, I can print out a full breakdown for you." Naomi's jaw tightened. She wasn't an expert, but she knew when someone was dodging a question. "Let me speak to a manager." Martin's polite facade cracked, just slightly. "That won't change anything, Ms. Carter. But if it makes you feel better, I'll call someone." He disappeared into the back office, leaving Naomi standing there, arms crossed. A few minutes later, another man walked out. He was taller, older, and his suit was a sharper cut than the rest of the employees she had seen that morning. His stride was measured, his presence deliberate. Edward Langston. The name alone was enough to send a chill through Naomi's spine. She had heard it before. Whispers about how he had built Summit National Bank into a financial powerhouse. Stories about how he could turn a profit from even the most questionable deals. He was the kind of executive who never got his hands dirty, but somehow always came out on top. He extended a hand. "Naomi Carter, isn't it?" His voice was deep, polished. "I understand you have some concerns." Naomi didn't shake his hand. "Yes, I do," she said, keeping her tone even. "I'd like an explanation for this fee I've been charged." Langston's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ah, the adjustment, a minor fluctuation in the terms of your mortgage. Nothing unusual. It's not in my contract." Langston tilted his head slightly, as if amused. "Contracts can be flexible, depending on market conditions." Naomi's pulse quickened. "That's not how legally binding agreements work." His smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Ms. Carter, let me be clear. You're a valued client, but this is how things operate in the real world. I can assure you everything is perfectly legal, and if you fail to make your payments, including the adjustments, you'll be in default. That wouldn't be ideal, would it?" A quiet threat. A chill settled in Naomi's stomach, but she didn't let it show. "So, let me get this straight," she said. "You're telling me that if I don't pay this perfectly legal fee, I could lose my home?" Langston leaned in just a little, voice lowering to a level only she could hear. "That's how contracts work, Miss Carter. You agreed to it. Whether you understood it or not is a different matter." Naomi clenched her fists. She had two choices: give in, pay the fees, and let Summit National Bank take more than they were entitled to, inch by inch, month by month, until she was bled dry, or fight back. Langston must have seen something shift in her expression because his smirk deepened. I'll give you some time to think it over. He straightened his suit, his confidence as solid as marble. But do remember, banks don't lose. Naomi walked out of that branch, heart pounding, her mind racing. She wouldn't let them take her home, and she sure as hell wouldn't let them get away with this. That night, she spread every document she had across her kitchen table. Mortgage agreements, statements, anything that could help her piece together what had happened. The weight of it all pressed against her, but she refused to let it crush her. There had to be a way, and she was going to find it. Because if they thought she would roll over and accept this, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Naomi sat in the waiting area of a prestigious law firm, her fingers gripping the strap of her purse as she watched the suited professionals stride past her. Everything about this place screamed authority, from the sleek, black marble floors to the walls lined with awards and framed articles about high-profile cases they had won. She had spent hours researching firms that specialized in consumer protection, firms that claimed to fight for the little guy. But as she sat there, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. The receptionist had barely looked at her when she checked in, and now she was waiting longer than expected. A tall man in his 60s finally approached. His graying hair was neatly combed back, and he wore an expensive navy blue suit that seemed to match the serious expression on his face. His nameplate read, Robert Calloway, Senior Partner. Ms. Carter, he said as he gestured for her to follow him into his office. She took a deep breath and walked in. The office was just as impressive as the rest of the firm. Bookshelves filled with thick legal volumes, a large window overlooking the city, and an air of quiet authority. She sat across from him as he settled behind his desk, adjusting his reading glasses. I understand you're having some issues with your mortgage lender, he said, skimming through the papers she had brought. Not just issues, Naomi corrected, leaning forward. They're charging me for fees that weren't in my contract. I asked for an explanation, and they couldn't give me one. Then they told me if I didn't pay, I'd lose my home. Calloway nodded slowly, but his expression remained unreadable. He flipped through the pages, then placed them neatly on his desk, folding his hands over them. Ms. Carter, he said with a tone of patience, Summit National Bank has one of the strongest legal teams in the country. We've seen cases like this before, and unfortunately, these adjustment fees often fall within legally ambiguous areas. They are designed to be difficult to challenge. Naomi stiffened. But it's fraud. They're scamming people. Calloway exhaled through his nose, his eyes betraying a flicker of something. Sympathy, perhaps, or just fatigue from having this conversation too many times before. It may feel that way, but proving it in court is another matter. Cases like this can take years, and more often than not, the bank wins. So you're saying there's nothing I can do? I'm saying that unless you have substantial, undeniable proof of wrongdoing, this will be an uphill battle. And even if you do, it won't be cheap. Naomi's stomach tightened. I can't afford a long legal fight, she admitted, but I can't afford to lose my home either. Calloway closed the folder and slid it back to her. My advice? Negotiate. Try to work out a payment plan, avoid a foreclosure battle. I know it's not fair, but it's the reality of these cases. Naomi stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. So you're telling me to just give up? Calloway's lips pressed together. He didn't say it outright, but his silence confirmed everything. Frustration flared inside her. She had come here hoping for a fight, but instead she was being dismissed. Again. She stood, gathering her documents with a sharp, controlled movement. Thank you for your time, she said, her voice clipped. Calloway watched her for a moment before offering a parting comment. Ms. Carter, I admire your determination, but be careful who you pick a fight with. Summit isn't just another bank. They have resources you can't imagine. She left without another word. As she stepped out onto the busy street, the weight of disappointment settled over her like a heavy coat. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't expected to be shut down so quickly. She leaned against a lamppost, rubbing her temples, trying to decide what to do next. Rough meeting. Naomi turned at the voice. A woman in her early 30s stood a few feet away, dressed in a slightly worn blazer and dark jeans, holding a coffee cup. Her brown eyes held a spark of curiosity, and she had the kind of presence that felt both approachable and sharp at the same time. Something like that, Naomi muttered. The woman took a sip of her coffee. Let me guess. They told you it's not worth the fight? Naomi narrowed her eyes. How did you know? Because it's always the same story, the woman said, stepping closer. Big firms don't take these cases because they know how the game is played. They don't fight unless there's a guaranteed win. She extended a hand. Lisa Thompson, I'm an attorney. A real one. Naomi hesitated before shaking her hand. Naomi Carter, Lisa smirked. I know. I was in the waiting room. Heard enough to know you're in deep with Summit. Naomi studied her carefully. And you're just randomly offering to help? Lisa shrugged. I run a small firm. I take on cases like yours because someone has to. And frankly, I hate people like Langston. She took another sip of her coffee. You're not the first person Summit has done this to, you know. Naomi's pulse quickened. You've seen this before? Lisa nodded. Multiple clients, all with eerily similar complaints. Extra fees, unexplained adjustments, contracts that don't quite say what the bank claims they do. But the tricky part? Most people back down before it ever reaches court. Because they're scared, Naomi murmured. Lisa gave a knowing nod. Or broke. Or exhausted. That's how Summit wins. They don't need to be right. They just need to make fighting them impossible. Naomi let out a slow breath, her mind already racing. Then how do we stop them? Lisa smiled. We start by proving a pattern. If we can show that this isn't just an isolated incident, but a systemic scam, we have a shot. Naomi nodded. Then let's get to work. Over the next few days, Naomi and Lisa pored over every document Naomi had, highlighting inconsistencies, cross-referencing contracts. But something was missing. Real, undeniable proof that the bank was intentionally misleading customers. Then Naomi stumbled upon something unexpected. An old forum post from years ago, buried deep in a consumer complaint website. A man detailing the exact same experience. Mysterious fees, threats of foreclosure, a legal battle he couldn't win. And then she saw his name, Daniel Cho, former employee of Summit National Bank. Her heart pounded as she clicked on his profile, scanning his posts. He had once worked in the department that handled mortgage processing, and then, abruptly, he had disappeared. No further updates, no replies. It was as if he had been silenced. Lisa peered over her shoulder, reading the post. We need to find him. Naomi nodded, determination hardening in her chest. Because if he knows what I think he does, he might be the key to bringing all of this down. She exhaled slowly, staring at the screen. She had been right. This wasn't just about her mortgage. This was bigger. The first call came early in the morning. Naomi barely registered the vibration of her phone as she poured herself a cup of coffee, still groggy from the late night spent combing through mortgage documents. It wasn't until the second ring that she grabbed the phone and glanced at the screen. Unknown caller. She hesitated, then answered. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then a voice, low and controlled. You should stop digging. Ms. Carter. Naomi's grip on the phone tightened. Who is this? A pause. Then the voice continued, slow and deliberate. Consider this your only warning. Click. The line went dead. Naomi stood frozen, the coffee growing cold in her other hand. It could have been a prank, a coincidence, except it wasn't. Someone knew what she was doing, and they wanted her to stop. But that was just the beginning. By noon, her frustration turned into outright alarm. She had tried to transfer some funds from her savings account to her checking, only to be met with an error message. Confused, she refreshed the page, but the result was the same. She called the bank's customer service line. Ms. Carter, the representative said, voice polite but firm, your account has been flagged for suspicious activity. A hold has been placed while we conduct an internal review. Naomi frowned. Suspicious activity? I've done nothing but pay my bills. I understand your concern, but this is standard protocol. You'll receive an update in 3 to 5 business days. I don't have 3 to 5 business days, Naomi shot back. I need access to my account now. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's nothing more I can do at this time. Click. Another dead end. Her heart pounded as she stared at her laptop screen. They were tightening their grip. First the calls, now her bank account. And when she checked her mortgage records, her stomach lurched. A notice of contract review had been added to her file. The bank was reevaluating her mortgage agreement, meaning they could claim a breach and void her contract altogether. They weren't just warning her, they were trying to erase her. Lisa didn't bother with pleasantries when Naomi showed up at her office. Her face set in a grim expression. "I had a feeling something like this would happen," she said, motioning for Naomi to sit as she slid a file across the desk. Naomi barely got her breath back before Lisa continued. "I've been digging into Summit's legal history. They don't just defend themselves against lawsuits, Naomi. They prevent them, by any means necessary." Naomi flipped open the folder. Inside was a series of transactions, payments funneled through a private legal firm with no public records of their cases. Lisa tapped the document with her pen. "This firm isn't just for standard litigation. They specialize in shutting people down before lawsuits ever reach court." Naomi looked up. "Are you saying Summit's paying off judges?" Lisa shook her head. "Not directly. It's more subtle. They pressure plaintiffs until they drop their cases, freezing assets, discrediting witnesses, leveraging loopholes in contracts. The whole thing is airtight." Naomi exhaled. "So what do we do?" Lisa smirked. "We hit them where they're weakest. If we can prove a pattern, find multiple victims, Summit won't be able to silence everyone." Naomi nodded, but before she could speak, her phone buzzed. A text. "Cafe on 9th Street, 6 p.m. I have information." No name. Lisa glanced at the screen and raised an eyebrow. "That him?" Naomi exhaled. "Yeah, Daniel Cho." Naomi arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, choosing a booth near the back where she could see the door. She ordered a tea, fingers tapping anxiously against the table as she waited. At exactly 6, the door opened, and a man stepped inside. He was younger than she expected, maybe mid-30s, but his posture was tense, his eyes darting around the cafe like he was expecting someone to be watching. He slid into the seat across from her, barely glancing up. "You Naomi?" She nodded. "Daniel?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I shouldn't be here." "Then why are you?" Daniel looked up, his expression grim. "Because I know what Summit does, and you're in over your head." Naomi leaned forward. "Tell me about the fees." He let out a bitter laugh. "The fees are just the beginning. Summit has a system. They target specific loan holders, people who won't question a small increase at first. Then they layer the charges, calling them different things each time. Once a customer complains, they either redirect them with vague explanations or claim it was in the fine print." Naomi's chest tightened. "So they count on people being too overwhelmed to fight back." Daniel nodded. "By the time most people realize they're being scammed, it's too late." "Why hasn't anyone exposed this?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because Summit isn't just a bank. It's a machine. They have people in every corner. Finance, media, even law enforcement. I tried to talk once." He let out a humorless chuckle. "Didn't go well." Naomi frowned. "What happened?" Daniel's eyes darkened. "I lost everything. My job, my savings, my credibility." A prickle of unease crawled up Naomi's spine. Before she could press further, he glanced past her, his expression shifting. "Don't turn around," he muttered. Her breath caught in her throat. "What?" "There's a black SUV outside," he said under his breath. "They've been following me for weeks." Naomi's pulse thundered in her ears. Slowly, she reached for her phone, her fingers tightening around it. Daniel pushed back from the table, grabbing his coat. "I have to go." "Wait." He shook his head. "I shouldn't have come." He hesitated. "Be careful, Naomi. You have no idea how far they'll go." And with that, he was gone. Naomi sat there, her tea untouched, her heart pounding. She had come for answers. Instead, she had confirmation of her worst fears. Summit National Bank wasn't just cheating people. They were covering their tracks. And now they knew she was looking. She didn't realize she was gripping her keys so tightly until she reached her front door, her knuckles aching. But the moment she stepped inside, the air around her shifted. Something was wrong. The apartment was dark, but a faint breeze told her the window was open. Except, she never left it open. Her pulse skyrocketed. She reached for the light switch. The living room was trashed. Drawers were pulled out, papers scattered. The couch cushions had been ripped open, as if someone had been searching for something, but nothing was stolen. This wasn't a robbery. Her eyes locked onto the dining table. A single sheet of paper lay there, neatly placed in the center. She stepped forward, her breath shallow as she read the words printed in bold black letters. Stop now before it's too late. The world felt like it tilted beneath her feet. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, and someone was willing to do whatever it took to keep that power intact. Naomi clenched her fists. She wasn't stopping, no matter what. Naomi sat on her couch, her hands gripping the note left behind by whoever had broken into her apartment. The words stared back at her, cold and deliberate. She had known she was stepping into dangerous territory, but she hadn't expected things to spiral this quickly. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? My apartment was broken into, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Someone went through my things, but nothing was stolen. I think it was meant to be a warning. The dispatcher took down her address and assured her that an officer would be sent over. 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up outside her building. A uniformed officer, mid-40s with tired eyes, stepped out and made his way to her door. His badge read, Officer Reynolds. Naomi led him inside, pointing to the mess that had been left behind. The overturned furniture, the scattered papers. Then she handed him the note. Reynolds barely glanced at it before shrugging. No signs of forced entry. Naomi frowned. They must have picked the lock. He sighed, glancing around. Miss Carter, are you sure you didn't just forget to lock the door? She stared at him. Are you serious? Look, I get that this is unsettling, but without a forced entry or missing valuables, this doesn't exactly scream break-in. It could be anything. Maybe a disgruntled friend? A misunderstanding? Naomi exhaled sharply. It's not a misunderstanding. Someone wants me to stop investigating Summit National Bank. That caught his attention. His expression flickered for just a second before he cleared his throat. Miss Carter, unless you have proof that someone is actively threatening you, there's not much we can do. Naomi narrowed her eyes. So that note? The ransacked apartment? That's not enough? I'll file a report, but unless something else happens, this is where it ends. She watched as he scribbled half-heartedly into his notepad before clicking his pen shut. He wasn't taking this seriously, and maybe that was the point. Reynolds met her gaze with something that almost resembled pity. Be careful what you get yourself into, Miss Carter. He left without another word. Naomi locked the door behind him, a chill running down her spine. If Summit had the police in their pocket, she was more alone in this than she thought. Lisa was already waiting at the coffee shop when Naomi arrived, a laptop open in front of her. She didn't even look up as Naomi sat down. You're not going to like this, Lisa said, tapping at the screen. Then just tell me, Naomi said, bracing herself. Lisa turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a transaction statement, an 8-figure payment from Summit National Bank to a private legal firm. Meet Ashford and Kane, Lisa said. A firm so off the books, they don't even have a website. Their only clients? Corporations with legal problems too big to handle internally. Naomi scanned the details, her pulse quickening. So Summit is paying them to make sure lawsuits disappear. Not just lawsuits, Lisa corrected. People, clients, evidence. Whatever threatens their business model, they bury it. Naomi swallowed. You think they're behind Daniel's disappearance? Lisa hesitated before nodding. He wouldn't be the first. Naomi's stomach twisted. Daniel had agreed to talk to her. Now he was nowhere to be found. She pulled out her phone and dialed his number again, even though she already knew what would happen. This number is no longer in service. Lisa watched her carefully. He's gone, Naomi. Naomi shook her head. Number. He was scared, but he wouldn't just run. Someone got to him. Lisa sighed. We need proof before we can make that claim. Naomi clenched her jaw. Then let's get proof. 2 days later, Naomi got a call. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered anyway. Ms. Carter, the voice on the other end said smoothly. She recognized it instantly. Edward Langston. I assume you've been quite busy lately, he continued, his voice dripping with politeness. Naomi gripped the phone. What do you want? Langston chuckled. Not much. Just a conversation. I'd like to offer you some advice. I don't need advice from a crook. A pause. Then his voice dropped to something lower, more calculated. You should be careful who you call a crook, Miss Carter. Words have consequences. Naomi exhaled slowly, trying to keep her voice even. Is that a threat? A warning, he corrected. Meet me at my office. Let's talk. Naomi hesitated. Every instinct told her this was a bad idea. But at the same time, Langston didn't need to talk to her to make her life hell. If he wanted her gone, she'd already be gone. So what was this really about? I'll be there, she said. Langston's office was on the top floor of a sleek, glass-covered high-rise. Naomi walked into the building, ignoring the way the receptionist barely glanced at her before directing her to the private elevator. The doors closed, and the ride up felt endless. When she stepped out, Langston was already waiting, leaning against his desk like he had all the time in the world. Ms. Carter, he greeted with that infuriating smirk. I appreciate you coming. Let's get this over with, Naomi said, folding her arms. Langston sighed, pushing away from the desk and strolling toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. I respect persistence. It's rare to see someone so determined. He turned back to her. But you're making a mistake. Naomi met his gaze without flinching. The only mistake I made was trusting your bank. Langston's smile thinned. You think you're uncovering some grand conspiracy, don't you? That you're about to bring down the system. He shook his head. But what you fail to understand is that the system isn't something you fight. It's something you learn to work within. Is that why you bury lawsuits and threaten people? Langston chuckled. Oh, Naomi, you really think I need threats? I don't operate that way. He took a step closer, his voice lowering. But accidents happen. People lose their jobs, homes, savings. Naomi's fist clenched at her sides. Walk away, he said. Take your little mortgage settlement. Move on with your life. Because if you don't, well, he spread his hands. Let's just say I can't guarantee your comfort or your safety. Naomi exhaled, steadying herself. You're scared. Langston's eyes darkened. If you weren't, we wouldn't be having this conversation, she continued. You wouldn't be trying to buy me off or scare me away. She tilted her head. So what is it, Langston? What's in those records that you don't want me to find? His expression faltered. Naomi smiled. I'll take that as confirmation. She turned, heading for the door. Think carefully, Ms. Carter, Langston called after her. Naomi paused but didn't turn around. Langston let the silence linger before speaking again. I'd hate for you to lose something more valuable than just your home. A shiver ran down her spine, but she refused to let it show. She walked out without looking back. But she knew one thing for certain. Langston was afraid, which meant she was onto something. Lisa stepped out of her car, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, scrolling through emails as she approached the entrance to her office. The morning was cool, the city just waking up, but something felt off. She reached for the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. Frowning, she tried again. Still locked. Her office never locked its doors during working hours. Her stomach tightened as she stepped back, glancing around. The security guard usually stationed at the front desk was nowhere to be seen. Her phone buzzed. An email notification. She tapped the screen. Subject: Immediate suspension. Lisa, due to a violation of confidential client information, you have been placed on indefinite leave. Effective immediately, your access to company resources has been revoked. Further inquiries should be directed to HR. Lisa felt the air leave her lungs. She scrolled further. Another email. Your corporate account has been deactivated. A cold realization settled in. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. She had been fired for helping Naomi. Lisa clenched her jaw. She had known they would push back, but she hadn't expected them to move this quickly. She turned on her heels and walked away, her mind already racing. They thought this would stop her. They were wrong. Naomi sat at her kitchen table, rubbing her temples as she flipped through the stack of legal documents spread out before her. A thick envelope had arrived that morning, stamped with the logo of Summit National Bank's legal department. She had opened it with a sinking feeling. Inside was a formal lawsuit. Summit was suing her. The allegations? Defamation, financial harm, intentional interference with business operations. If she lost, she wouldn't just be in debt, she would be destroyed. The damages they were demanding would wipe out everything she had. Her stomach churned. This was their play. If they couldn't intimidate her into silence, they would bleed her dry in court. Her phone buzzed. Lisa. They fired me, Lisa said the moment Naomi picked up. Naomi closed her eyes. I just got served. A pause. Then Lisa cursed under her breath. They're hitting back hard. They want to scare us. Well, it's working, Lisa admitted. Then after a beat, but we're not stopping. Naomi exhaled. We're not. That afternoon, Naomi drove across town to meet with a man named Michael Reed, a former Summit customer who had reached out after hearing about her case. He had agreed to be a witness, to testify that he had also been a victim of fraudulent fees. When she arrived at the coffee shop where they had planned to meet, he wasn't there. She checked her watch. 10 minutes late. She pulled out her phone and dialed his number, straight to voicemail. Her gut tightened. A waitress passed by, balancing a tray of empty cups. Excuse me, Naomi said. Michael Reed. He was supposed to meet me here. Do you know if he's been in today? The waitress hesitated. Yeah, I know him. He was here yesterday, but what? The waitress glanced around, lowering her voice. 2 men came in asking for him. He left with them. Didn't look happy about it. Naomi's hands went cold. She grabbed her phone and texted Lisa. Michael is gone. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Naomi started driving home. The city lights flickered on, casting long shadows along the highway. She tried to focus, but her mind was a storm of unanswered questions. Lisa was out of a job. Michael had disappeared. She was being sued into oblivion. They were closing in. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. A black SUV. It had been behind her for miles now. Her pulse quickened. She changed lanes. So did they. She pressed the gas, weaving between cars. The SUV kept pace. Panic crept up her spine. Then, without warning, the SUV accelerated, swerving ahead of her. Naomi slammed the brakes as the vehicle cut her off, tires screeching against the pavement. Her heart pounded as a man stepped out. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't hiding. He wanted her to see him. He walked up to her driver's side window and tapped on the glass, slow and deliberate. Naomi's fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. The man smirked. Mrs. Carter, he said, voice calm, almost amused. We've warned you. Naomi didn't move. He leaned in slightly. Turn back now, while you still can. Then just like that, he turned and walked away. The SUV sped off into the night. Naomi sat there, her breath coming fast, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. They wanted her to be afraid. They wanted her to quit. But all they had done was confirm one thing. Naomi sat at her kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. The events of the past few days played over in her mind like a relentless storm. Lisa losing her job, Michael disappearing, the lawsuit from Summit, and the man in the black SUV making it clear that this was more than just intimidation. She had known this fight wouldn't be easy. She had prepared herself for legal hurdles, corporate pushback, even financial strain. But she hadn't anticipated just how far Summit National Bank was willing to go. Across from her, Lisa leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. We need to talk about what happens next, Lisa said. Naomi exhaled. I'm not backing down. Lisa ran a hand through her hair, frustrated. I didn't say you should, but let's be real here. We've lost our only known witness. They wiped out the financial records, and now they're trying to bury you in court. Naomi's fingers curled around her coffee mug. Then we find another way. Lisa sighed. You're putting yourself in serious danger. Naomi met her gaze steady. Lisa, if we stop now, they win. And not just against me, against everyone they've done this to. I can't live with that. Lisa studied her for a long moment before shaking her head with a half smile. You really don't know when to quit, do you? Naomi smirked. Nope. Lisa exhaled. Fine, then let's figure out our next move. But before they could, Naomi's phone buzzed. A blocked number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? There was silence on the other end for a second. Then a low voice. You're running out of time, Miss Carter. Naomi stiffened. Who is this? The only person who can give you what you need. The voice was measured, controlled. Male, older, but not frail. Someone used to being in charge. I don't play games, Naomi said. A soft chuckle. Good. Then listen carefully. There was a slight rustling, as if he was shifting in his seat. I left something for you. Check your mailbox. Before Naomi could ask anything else, the line went dead. Lisa raised an eyebrow. Another threat? Naomi stood, already moving toward the door. I don't think so. A plain, unmarked envelope sat inside her mailbox. No return address. No markings. Back in the apartment, she tore it open. Inside was a contract, not hers, but an internal financial document from Summit National Bank. Naomi's breath caught as she scanned the pages. This wasn't just a mortgage agreement. It was a breakdown of a fraudulent system, fees that shouldn't exist, inflated interest rates targeting specific customers, loopholes designed to legally steal money. At the bottom, a signature. David Kim, Chief Financial Officer. Or rather, former Chief Financial Officer. Naomi's eyes widened. Lisa leaned over her shoulder. Where the hell did you get this? Naomi picked up her phone, fingers flying as she texted the unknown number. Who are you? A reply came almost immediately. If you want the truth, meet me, but come alone. That night, Naomi pulled into an old, nearly abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of town. The only other car there was a sleek black sedan. She stepped out, bracing herself against the cold. The driver's side door of the sedan opened, and a man stepped out. Late 50s, maybe early 60s, wearing an expensive but slightly rumpled suit. David Kim. She had seen his face before, in corporate articles about Summit's rise, in news reports about his sudden resignation 3 years ago. Naomi kept her stance firm. You sent the contract? Kim nodded. I did. Why? He let out a breath, shoving his hands into his coat pockets. Because I helped build the system that's screwing you over. Naomi narrowed her eyes. And now you have a conscience? He let out a dry chuckle. Something like that. Silence stretched between them before he continued. I didn't leave Summit. I was forced out. Langston made sure of it. Naomi folded her arms. Why? Kim hesitated, then gestured toward the passenger seat of his car. Get in. We need to talk. Naomi didn't move. I don't get into cars with strangers, Kim smirked. Good. Then I'll keep it short. He pulled a folded document from his coat and handed it to her. Naomi opened it and felt her stomach drop. It was a signed internal memo, and it confirmed everything. Langston knew about the illegal fees. He had approved them. More than that, he had directed Summit's legal team to hide the evidence. Naomi felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was what they needed. This is proof, she whispered. Kim nodded. It's a start. Naomi looked up. Why are you giving this to me? His jaw tightened. Because Langston took everything from me. My career, my reputation. His voice dropped lower. And because if someone doesn't stop him, he'll keep getting away with it. Naomi exhaled, gripping the papers. Then let's stop him. Kim nodded, stepping back toward his car. Be careful, Ms. Carter. Langston won't let this go unanswered. He got in, and the sedan disappeared into the night. Naomi stood there, staring at the evidence in her hands. Langston had buried every other lawsuit before it even started. But this time the truth was coming out. The next morning, Naomi sat across from Lisa in a diner, the memo spread out between them. Lisa whistled. We could take this to court, Naomi nodded. And to the press. Lisa raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? The moment we do, Langston's going to come after us harder than ever. Naomi took a slow breath. He's already coming after us. The difference now? We're ready. Lisa smirked. Then let's make some noise. What Naomi didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that she wasn't the only one investigating Summit. In a sleek, high-rise office across town, a journalist stared at his laptop, typing furiously. The headline read, Summit National Bank accused of widespread mortgage fraud. Sources say evidence may surface soon. The reporter leaned back, tapping his pen against his desk. He needed proof, solid, undeniable proof. And if Naomi Carter had what he thought she did, It was only a matter of time before the whole world knew. Langston sat behind his massive mahogany desk, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on the skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. The city stretched out before him, glittering under the morning sun. It was a view of power, of control, one he had spent years securing. But now there was a crack in the foundation. David Kim had resurfaced. It hadn't taken long to find out. The moment Naomi Carter started making noise, Langston's people had started watching her. And when she met Kim, it became clear. Someone within his empire had turned against him. Langston picked up his phone, dialing a number. A crisp voice answered. "Yes, sir." "Find out everything on Kim," Langston said. "Every move he's made since he left this company, and take care of the problem." "Yes, sir." Langston leaned back, his expression unreadable. He had built Summit National Bank to be untouchable. But now Naomi Carter was forcing her way into a fight she didn't understand. It was time to remind her who she was dealing with. Naomi woke up to chaos. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages, notifications, and missed calls. Lisa's name flashed across the screen, and Naomi answered immediately. "What's going on?" Lisa's voice was tight. "Turn on the news." Naomi grabbed the remote, switching to a major network. A bold headline ran across the bottom of the screen. "Mortgage scam or manipulation? Homeowner Naomi Carter accused of fraud." Her stomach dropped. The anchor's voice filled the room. "Breaking news. Recent legal documents suggest that Naomi Carter, the woman claiming to be a victim of fraudulent mortgage fees, may have exaggerated or even fabricated her claims in an attempt to extort Summit National Bank." Naomi's mouth went dry. The report continued, shifting to a photo of her, followed by a list of supposed inconsistencies in her financial records. Then a so-called expert appeared on screen, shaking his head. "This appears to be an opportunistic lawsuit. We've seen cases like this before. Individuals looking for a payout, using false accusations to pressure corporations into settlements." Naomi's grip tightened around her phone. Lisa's voice was urgent. "This is a hit piece. Summit fed them this story." Naomi's breath came out in short bursts. "They're trying to discredit me." "It gets worse," Lisa said. "They leaked your financial records." Naomi's stomach clenched. "What?" Lisa sighed. "They made it look like you were in deep debt, like you've been looking for a way to get money fast. The media's eating it up." Naomi felt the weight of the attack settle over her like a crushing force. They weren't just trying to silence her. They were destroying her reputation. The backlash was immediate. Her inbox flooded with hate mail. Social media was worse. Another fraud playing the victim. She probably lost her house because she was irresponsible. People like her make it harder for real victims to get justice. Everywhere she turned, strangers were tearing her apart. Lisa's voice was tense when they met later that day. "Naomi, if the public turns against us, we'll never win in court. Summit doesn't have to prove anything. They just have to make people doubt you." Naomi rubbed her temples. "So what do we do?" Lisa exhaled. "We need to shift the narrative." Naomi leaned back. "And how do we do that when they control everything?" Lisa was silent for a moment. Then she pulled out her laptop. "We prove they're lying." Naomi spent the next several hours poring over her financial records, trying to find any flaw in Summit's attack. She scanned every statement, every transaction, looking for something, anything, that could counter the smear campaign against her. And then something caught her eye. A small deposit in her account from 3 years ago. A transaction she had never noticed before. It wasn't much, just a couple $100s. But the sender's name sent a chill down her spine. A corporate account traced back to Summit National Bank. Naomi's pulse quickened. Why would Summit deposit money into her account years before this lawsuit? She clicked deeper into the transaction history, following the digital paper trail. And then she saw it. The same corporate account had made dozens of similar transactions. Small, unnoticeable amounts sent to various customers. At first glance, it looked harmless. But when she followed the money, she realized what Summit had been doing. They were laundering money through customer accounts. Lisa leaned over her shoulder. "Holy! Naomi, this isn't just fraud. This is criminal." Naomi stared at the screen. This was real proof. If they could tie this to Langston, he wouldn't just be facing civil lawsuits. he could go to prison. Naomi exhaled slowly. Summit had tried to bury her, but they had left a crack in their foundation, and now she was going to tear the whole thing down. Naomi sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly together, heart pounding in her chest. The courtroom was packed, journalists, legal analysts, even a few members of the public who had followed the case since the story broke. Everyone wanted to see how this played out. At the other end of the room, Summit National Bank's legal team sat in a row, pristine suits, calm expressions, exuding the quiet confidence of people who had never lost a case like this before. At the center of it all was Edward Langston, seated behind his attorneys, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. He looked relaxed, as if he were watching an already decided game play out before him. And Naomi could see why. The morning had been brutal. Summit's lead attorney, Richard Hawthorne, was relentless. He paced in front of the jury, his voice smooth and authoritative. "This case is simple," Hawthorne began. "Ms. Carter is asking this court to believe that a world-renowned financial institution with decades of reputable service engaged in fraud against her, despite no hard evidence supporting her claims." He turned to Naomi, pausing for effect. "She signed a contract. She made her payments. She only decided she had a problem when she felt buyer's remorse." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Naomi's stomach tightened. Hawthorne flipped through a document, holding it up for everyone to see. "This is Ms. Carter's mortgage agreement. You'll notice, clear as day, the outline fees she agreed to. If she failed to understand them, that is not our client's fault." Lisa leaned over, whispering, "They're making this about you, not them." Naomi clenched her jaw. That was the strategy. Hawthorne gestured toward the jury. "Ask yourselves, why now? Why sue years later? Why go to the press instead of working with the bank directly?" He turned back to Naomi, his smile sharp. "I think we all know why." He didn't say the word, but he didn't have to. Greed. That's what he wanted them to think, that Naomi was just another opportunist trying to cash out. Langston sat motionless, watching, and Naomi felt something she hadn't expected. Doubt. Lisa wasn't going down without a fight. When it was her turn, she strode toward the jury, her voice calm but commanding. "My client is not suing out of regret," Lisa said. "She's suing because she, like thousands of others, was deceived. The difference? She held up a folder. She found the evidence to prove it." Lisa turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit B into evidence." The court clerk took the document to the bench. Judge Coleman, an older man known for his skepticism toward consumer lawsuits, adjusted his glasses and studied it. "This is a bank transaction log." Lisa nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. A log that shows unauthorized withdrawals from Ms. Carter's account, disguised as legitimate charges." She turned to the jury. "This isn't speculation. This isn't an opinion. This is a paper trail." Langston's smirk faded slightly. Lisa continued. "Summit National Bank didn't just mislead customers. They stole from them." She let the words hang in the air before returning to her seat. Naomi felt the tide shifting, but they weren't done yet. Then came the moment no one expected. The courtroom doors opened. Whispers spread through the audience. Even Judge Coleman leaned forward slightly. A man stepped inside, walking toward the witness stand. David Kim. Langston's expression finally changed. Lisa shot Naomi a look. Neither of them had spoken to Kim since their meeting. They had no idea he was coming, but there he was. Lisa stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to call David Kim to the stand." Langston's attorneys instantly objected. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Mr. Kim was not on the witness list." Judge Coleman studied Kim, then turned to Lisa. "Did you know your witness would appear today?" Lisa shook her head. "No, Your Honor, but given his direct involvement with Summit National Bank, I believe his testimony is vital." Coleman considered this for a long moment. Then finally, objection overruled. Langston stiffened. Kim stepped up to the stand, placing his hand on the Bible. The bailiff swore him in. Naomi watched as he settled into his seat, looking around the room, as if weighing his next words carefully. Then he turned to the jury. "My name is David Kim. I worked at Summit National Bank for 10 years. Silence. He took a slow breath. And I'm here today because I know exactly how they've been stealing from their customers. The courtroom erupted. Judge Coleman banged his gavel. Order! I will have order in this court. Naomi barely heard it. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She glanced toward Langston. He looked genuinely shaken. This was it. The game had changed, and Naomi Carter was no longer the one on the defensive. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that carried weight. Naomi sat frozen, her pulse hammering as she watched Langston's attorney rise from his seat with calculated ease. Richard Hawthorne straightened his tie, his expression as composed as ever. Your Honor, before Mr. Kim proceeds, we have a critical motion to submit. Judge Coleman peered over his glasses. Go on. Hawthorne turned slightly, addressing the jury as much as the judge. We have reason to believe that the so-called evidence presented by the plaintiff, particularly these transaction logs, was obtained illegally. Therefore, we move to have it stricken from the record. Naomi's stomach plummeted. Lisa shot her a sharp glance, her expression screaming, stay calm. Judge Coleman folded his hands. Explain. Hawthorne gestured toward Naomi's table. The financial records in question were obtained outside of legal discovery. There was no proper subpoena, no authorization. This means, he turned, letting the words land, that the plaintiff has engaged in what is, at best, reckless disregard for legal procedure, and at worst, outright misconduct. Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. Langston didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. He sat back, watching it unfold, completely in control. Judge Coleman's face remained unreadable. Ms. Thompson, do you wish to respond? Lisa stood, keeping her voice level. Your Honor, the information in those records is factual. It proves fraudulent activity. Hawthorne cut in smoothly. Factual or not, the law's the law. If we start allowing illegally obtained evidence, where do we draw the line? Judge Coleman sighed. I'll need to review this. A pause, then, for now, all evidence regarding these financial transactions is excluded from this trial until further review. Naomi's breath caught. Langston's smirk deepened. Lisa sat down, fist clenched. They played us. Naomi barely heard her. Everything, their entire case, was hinged on those records. Without them, the fraud allegations were just allegations, and Langston knew it. The questions came hard and fast. The prosecution wasted no time pressing Naomi. Ms. Carter, aside from the now inadmissible records, do you have any other tangible proof that Summit National Bank engaged in fraudulent practices? Naomi hesitated. They knew she didn't. That was the trap. The only other real evidence they had was David Kim's testimony, and now, with the court questioning the legitimacy of the records, Kim's words would be easy to discredit. She needed something else, something undeniable. Lisa was already typing furiously on her laptop, likely searching for any possible counterattack. Naomi swallowed hard. But before she could finish, Lisa's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and immediately stiffened. Then, without a word, she grabbed Naomi's wrist and pulled her aside. Naomi leaned in, lowering her voice. What? Lisa's eyes flickered toward the back of the courtroom. There's a journalist here, and he says he has something. 15 minutes later, in the courthouse hallway, Naomi stood face to face with Tom Bridger, a well-respected financial journalist. He didn't waste time. I have a recording, he said, from an inside source. A conversation, Langston himself, discussing how they manipulated contracts to overcharge customers. Naomi's breath caught. Lisa stared at him. You're sure? Bridger nodded. I wasn't ready to publish it without more evidence, but with the trial going south, he handed Naomi a flash drive. This could change everything. Naomi exhaled, gripping the small device like it was her lifeline. She turned to Lisa. We put this out now. Lisa frowned. We should go through legal. No. Naomi's voice was firm. Langston is playing dirty. We're done waiting for permission. Lisa studied her for a long second, then nodded. And with that, Naomi pulled out her phone, opened Twitter, and uploaded the file. Inside the courtroom, everything was about to change. Langston's confidence shattered the moment his own voice filled the airwaves. The clip spread like wildfire across social media, then hit national news within the hour. I don't care how we do it. Bury the fees in the contracts. The idiots don't read them anyway. Make sure the lawyers sanitize it. If anyone questions it, we'll drown them in paperwork. This is business. If they can't afford it, that's their problem. Naomi watched as Langston's smirk finally disappeared. Judge Coleman called for an immediate recess. Lisa exhaled, shaking her head. Naomi, we just turned this trial into a public scandal. Naomi looked at Langston, at the fury hidden beneath his now blank expression. Then with quiet certainty, she whispered, Good. Langston stood in his office, gripping the edge of his desk as he watched the news coverage unfold on the massive screen mounted on the wall. The footage was everywhere now. His own voice, his own words, damning him in front of the entire country. I don't care how we do it, bury the fees in the contracts. The idiots don't read them anyway. The fallout was swift. Summit National Bank's stock had plummeted overnight. Calls from investors flooded his phone, demanding explanations. Some of the bank's top executives had already begun distancing themselves from him, issuing carefully worded public statements about how they were unaware of any misconduct and would cooperate fully with investigators. Langston slammed his fist on the desk. He had built Summit into a fortress. He had crushed lawsuits before, buried whistleblowers, drowned complaints in bureaucratic red tape. But this was spiraling out of control. Naomi Carter had backed him into a corner, and now she was about to learn what happened to people who did that. That afternoon, the courtroom was buzzing with anticipation. The judge had just reconvened the session after the media firestorm. Naomi sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly together, waiting for the next move. Langston's lawyer, Richard Hawthorne, stood up with a confident smirk. Your Honor, before we proceed, we have a new motion to submit. Judge Coleman sighed. Proceed. Hawthorne adjusted his cufflinks before speaking. The plaintiff, Ms. Carter, has presented herself as a victim of fraudulent lending practices, he said, pausing dramatically. But the truth is, she's the one who has committed a crime. A murmur spread across the courtroom. Naomi's stomach twisted. Lisa shot her a look. Stay calm. Judge Coleman raised an eyebrow. Explain. Mr. Hawthorne turned to face Naomi directly. We have evidence that Ms. Carter gained access to Summit National Bank's internal financial records through illegal means. The room erupted in whispers. Lisa stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This is a baseless accusation. Hawthorne held up a document. This is a security report from Summit National Bank's IT department. It traces unauthorized access back to Ms. Carter's home IP address. The files she obtained, the same ones she's using in this case, were stolen. Judge Coleman's expression darkened. Mr. Hawthorne, are you accusing Ms. Carter of hacking into the bank system? Hawthorne nodded solemnly. Yes, Your Honor. And given the severity of this offense, we request that the court dismiss this case immediately and refer Ms. Carter's actions for criminal investigation. Naomi felt the air leave her lungs. Lisa gripped the edge of the table. Your Honor, this is a lie. These documents were obtained through investigative means, not hacking. Judge Coleman held up a hand. I'll need time to review this. He turned to Naomi. Ms. Carter, do you have anything to say in your defense? Naomi's mind raced. If this charge stuck, she wouldn't just lose the case. She could go to jail. Langston sat back in his chair, watching with cold amusement. This was his real move. Later that evening, Naomi sat in Lisa's office, staring blankly at the stacks of files in front of her. They set me up, she murmured. Lisa paced back and forth. We knew they'd fight dirty, but this? They're trying to end you, Naomi. Naomi exhaled sharply. Can they make it stick? Lisa hesitated. The problem is, we don't have a way to disprove it yet. If the judge believes their evidence, you could be charged. And if that happens, Naomi looked away. I lose everything. A heavy silence settled between them. Then, Lisa's phone buzzed. She frowned at the screen. It's a blocked number. Naomi tensed. Answer it. Lisa put the call on speaker. Who is this? A distorted voice came through the line. I have information you need. Naomi's pulse spiked. Who are you? A pause, then. I work for Summit National Bank, and I can prove that Langston is behind everything. Lisa and Naomi exchanged looks. The voice continued. But if I come forward, I need protection. This isn't just fraud. It's bigger than that. Naomi gripped the phone. What do you have? The voice hesitated. Internal emails, financial reports, proof that Langston ordered the creation of fraudulent fees. Lisa leaned forward. Can you prove he faked the charges against Naomi? Another pause, then, yes, but I can't go to court. If they find out I talked to you, I'm dead. Lisa lowered her voice. We need to meet. The voice dropped even lower. Tomorrow, midnight, I'll text you the location. Then the line went dead. Naomi and Lisa stared at each other. Lisa exhaled. This could be it. Naomi nodded. Or it could be a trap. Lisa rubbed her temples. What do we do? Naomi clenched her fists. We go. At exactly midnight, Naomi and Lisa arrived at an abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of town. The air was cold, the silence stretching between them like a warning. A lone figure stepped out of the shadows. A man, early 40s, dressed in a heavy jacket, his face partially hidden under a hood. Naomi took a cautious step forward. You're the one who called? He nodded. I don't have much time. Lisa pulled out her phone. Do you have the files? The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. This has everything, he said. Every fraudulent charge, every altered contract, every fake fee Langston approved. Naomi reached for it, but before she could, a set of headlights suddenly flared to life, blinding them. Lisa gasped. No! A black SUV sped toward them. Naomi grabbed the informant's arm and yanked him aside just as the vehicle came barreling past. The tires screeched, and then gunshots. Naomi ducked behind a car, her heart racing. Lisa shouted, They're trying to kill him! The informant shoved the USB drive into Naomi's hand. Take it! Run! Naomi didn't hesitate. She turned, bolting toward Lisa's car as another round of bullets shattered the pavement behind them. Lisa jumped into the driver's seat. Naomi barely slammed the door shut before Lisa floored the gas pedal. The SUV roared behind them, but Lisa swerved onto the main road, weaving through traffic at breakneck speed. Naomi clutched the USB drive against her chest, breath ragged. Lisa shot her a glance. Is it still with you? Naomi nodded. Yeah. Lisa gritted her teeth. Then we have everything we need. Naomi stared ahead, her jaw tight. Langston had just crossed a line. Now she was going to end him. Langston paced the length of his office, his jaw tight, phone pressed against his ear. The voice on the other end spoke in hurried tones, but he barely heard it. His mind was racing. The informant. Gone. Hours ago, his men had made sure of it. No witness, no testimony, no case. And yet, something felt wrong. He could feel it in his bones. He snapped, Tell me again. Are you sure he won't talk? The voice hesitated. Positive. He's off the grid. Langston exhaled sharply. Good. But before he could relish his victory, his office door burst open. A junior executive, pale and sweating, rushed in. Sir, you need to see this. Langston grabbed the remote, turning on the news. The breaking headline sent a cold wave through him. Federal investigation launched into Summit National Bank. His stomach dropped. The screen cut to a press conference. A government spokesperson stood at a podium, a sea of reporters in front of her. We have received substantial evidence suggesting systemic financial misconduct within Summit National Bank, she said. Effective immediately, federal agencies will begin a full-scale audit. Langston's chest tightened. The investigation. This wasn't part of the plan. His power, his protection, had just vanished. In the courtroom, Naomi sat still, her hands clasped, listening as Lisa delivered the news. The federal government is stepping in, Lisa whispered. Langston's losing ground fast. Naomi could hardly believe it. For months, she had fought against a system designed to silence her, and now, for the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. Judge Coleman entered, adjusting his robe as he took his seat. Court is back in session. Langston's attorney, Richard Hawthorne, stood immediately. Your Honor, given the ongoing federal investigation, we move to have this case postponed indefinitely. Lisa shot up. Objection. This is an attempt to stall the case. The fraud committed by Summit National Bank is independent of any federal investigation. Judge Coleman considered, then nodded. Motion denied. We will proceed. A flicker of panic crossed Hawthorne's face. He glanced toward Langston. Langston's expression was unreadable, but Naomi knew exactly what was happening. For the first time, he was out of moves. That night, Langston met with his remaining allies in a private suite at the top of a luxury hotel. The mood was tense. "This is getting out of hand," one of the bankers muttered. "The government is involved now. We can't protect you." Langston leaned back, forcing a cold smile. "We'll see about that." A man in a sharp suit shook his head. "Face it, you're done." Langston's eyes darkened. Not yet. He still had one card left to play. The only way to survive was to destroy Naomi Carter completely. The question was, how far was he willing to go? The next morning, Naomi walked into the courthouse with her head held high. She knew the fight wasn't over. Langston wasn't the type to go down quietly. But as she stepped into the courtroom, one thing was clear. He wasn't untouchable anymore. Langston leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the polished wood of his desk. Outside, the city skyline stretched endlessly, glittering against the darkening sky. But tonight, the view didn't bring him the usual satisfaction. He had spent years mastering the game, manipulating markets, twisting laws, bending politicians to his will. Yet for the first time, he felt the ground shifting beneath him. The federal investigation was real. The courtroom momentum was slipping, and Naomi Carter had somehow turned herself from an insignificant nuisance into his greatest threat. He exhaled sharply and reached for his phone. The call connected instantly. A deep voice answered, "It's done." Langston smirked. That was the thing about power. It wasn't just about what you knew, but who owed you favors. The next morning in the courtroom, Naomi sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands wrapped around a pen she had yet to use. Lisa was next to her, scrolling through her laptop, but Naomi knew something was wrong the moment her attorney stopped breathing. Lisa's eyes flicked up, her expression tight. "What?" Naomi whispered. Lisa turned the screen. Naomi's stomach dropped. A breaking news alert flashed across the page. Federal investigation into Summit National Bank put on hold. Lisa clenched her jaw. Langston pulled some strings. Naomi felt a cold rage rise in her chest. Of course he did. Up at the defense table, Langston sat with his usual smug confidence. His attorney, Hawthorne, spoke with measured calm. "Your Honor, given the federal government's decision to pause their investigation, we move to dismiss all claims against my client." Lisa shot up instantly. "Objection. The investigation is being stalled due to external influence. The fraud has already been proven in this courtroom." Judge Coleman sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ms. Thompson, unless you can provide irrefutable evidence." "We can." Every head turned. David Kim stood at the entrance of the courtroom, his face unreadable. Langston's smirk vanished. Lisa wasted no time. "Your Honor, we request permission to submit new evidence." The judge sighed. "I'll allow it." Naomi locked eyes with Langston. He wasn't smirking anymore. Minutes later, a large screen was wheeled into the courtroom. Lisa inserted a flash drive. The screen flickered to life. The video began. It was grainy, clearly recorded from a hidden device, but the audio was crystal clear. And there he was, Edward Langston, sitting at the head of a conference table, surrounded by his legal team. His voice came through, smooth and arrogant. "They'll never read the contracts. That's the beauty of it." The room fell silent. Langston's attorney jumped up. "Objection. There's no confirmation this video is legitimate." Lisa remained unfazed. "Your Honor, this footage has been verified by forensic analysts. The metadata is intact. This is real." Judge Coleman nodded. "Overruled." The video continued. Langston leaned back in his chair, exuding the same smug confidence he had in this very courtroom. "If they figure it out, we bury them in legal fees until they give up. They don't have a choice. Nobody does." Naomi stole a glance at the jury. Some were visibly disgusted. Others stared at Langston as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Lisa let the silence settle before delivering the final blow. "This isn't just fraud. This is predatory financial crime." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we request an immediate ruling." Langston finally stood. His expression was unreadable, but Naomi could see it now, the faintest flicker of panic. For the first time in his life, Edward Langston had lost control, and Naomi Carter was the reason why. Langston sat stiffly at the defense table, his fingers interlaced, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. Reporters lined the back rows, their pens poised, cameras clicking with every movement he made. He had spent a lifetime maneuvering his way through every legal loophole, buying his way out of trouble. This time, however, the walls were closing in. His attorney leaned in, whispering, "We still have an option. We offer a settlement. The plaintiff gets paid, and this all goes away." Langston nodded slowly. It wasn't ideal, but he needed to cut his losses. He glanced at Naomi across the room. She sat calmly beside Lisa, her expression unreadable. She had been a nobody when this all started. Now, she had become his biggest threat. Langston cleared his throat and stood. "Your Honor, before we proceed further, I would like to offer Ms. Carter and the affected plaintiffs a settlement." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "A settlement?" Langston adjusted his tie, forcing a measured tone. "Yes, a fair, generous offer. Full financial compensation for every victim. Immediate restitution." The judge folded his hands. "Ms. Carter, do you wish to entertain this offer?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Naomi stood slowly. Every eye turned to her. She glanced at Lisa, who gave a slight nod. This was her choice. Naomi inhaled deeply before speaking. "No!" Gasps echoed. Langston's face barely changed, but Naomi saw the flicker of tension in his jaw. She took a step forward. "This case isn't just about money." She let her words settle before continuing. "It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that people like Edward Langston, people who use power and money to exploit others, don't just get to write a check and make their crimes disappear." Her voice was steady, unwavering. "If I take this settlement, what happens next? Langston moves on to the next scheme. Another bank, another group of victims, another person sitting in this chair, fighting for justice." She turned to face the judge. "Your Honor, I am not interested in a payoff. I am here for justice." A wave of applause broke out from the spectators. Even some members of the jury exchanged approving glances. Langston's fingers curled into fists. Judge Coleman nodded thoughtfully before turning back to the defense. "Mr. Langston, given the severity of the evidence presented in this trial, I will proceed with the ruling." Langston stiffened. He could feel it slipping through his fingers. Control, power, everything. Judge Coleman adjusted his glasses and picked up the verdict papers. After careful deliberation, the court finds the defendant, Edward Langston, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, financial misconduct, and conspiracy to defraud consumers. The room exploded into noise. Reporters scrambled for their phones, the clicking of cameras filling the air. The judge's voice cut through the commotion. Summit National Bank is ordered to provide full restitution to all affected customers. The bank's financial practices will be placed under federal oversight to prevent further fraudulent activity. Langston's face drained of color. Judge Coleman looked directly at him. "And as for Mr. Langston," a pause. The room fell silent again. "You are hereby remanded into federal custody pending further sentencing. Bail is denied." The courtroom erupted. Naomi sat still, her heart pounding, absorbing the moment. A uniformed officer approached Langston. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed in the silent room. Langston turned his head slightly, just enough to meet Naomi's gaze. No words were exchanged. She had won. Not just for herself, but for every single person he had ever exploited. As the officers led him away, Naomi finally let out a slow breath. The echoes of the judge's final ruling still lingered in Naomi's mind as she stepped out of the courthouse. The crisp autumn air greeted her, but the weight of what had just happened pressed heavier than ever. Edward Langston was finished. The once untouchable CEO had been let out in handcuffs, his empire crumbling beneath him. Summit National Bank was under federal scrutiny, and its top executives were falling like dominoes, resignations, subpoenas, and criminal charges stacking up by the hour. For the first time in years, Naomi breathed freely, but the world outside the courtroom was just as ruthless. The next morning, Naomi sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open, scanning the headlines. The woman who stood against the system, Naomi Carter's shocking courtroom victory. A hero or a reckless crusader, Did Naomi Carter's lawsuit damage the economy? She sighed. For every article praising her as a symbol of justice, there was another calling her a danger to financial institutions. Some analysts warned that her lawsuit would make banks more cautious, tightening loan approvals and affecting consumers. And then there were the hate messages. Her inbox was flooded. You ruined lives with this lawsuit. Enjoy your moment, but you won't change anything. The system will bury you next. She knew this battle wouldn't end in a single courtroom. Lisa's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Are you reading the comments again? Naomi looked up. Lisa stood at the door, arms crossed, shaking her head. You already won, Lisa continued. You don't owe them anything. Naomi exhaled. I know, but it feels like... She paused. Like the fight isn't over. Lisa sat across from her, sliding a business card across the table. Naomi glanced at it. Thompson and Associates, Consumer Protection Law. Naomi's eyebrows lifted. You did it? Lisa grinned. Yeah, I turned down that big corporate offer. Decided I'd rather build something real. Naomi picked up the card, running her thumb over the embossed letters. You're really doing this? Lisa nodded. And I want you to be my first client. You're gonna need protection. These banks, they don't forget. They're gonna fight back in ways you haven't even imagined yet. Naomi smirked. I don't plan on backing down. Lisa leaned back. I figured. For the first time in days, Naomi let herself smile. Naomi stepped into her apartment, closing the door behind her with a deep exhale. The space was the same as it had always been, her bookshelf lined with legal books, the soft hum of the city outside her window, the framed pictures on the wall that had been untouched throughout this entire ordeal. But she had changed. She no longer carried the same uncertainty, the same fear she had once felt when she first uncovered the deception buried within her mortgage contract. She had faced an empire and won. She set down her keys and placed her hands on the counter, letting the reality of it all sink in. For months, she had lived in a world where every step was a battle, where each piece of evidence, every court hearing, every moment of doubt had been another weight pressing down on her shoulders. Now, for the first time, there was silence. No more emergency meetings. No more fear of being followed. No more sleepless nights spent poring over contracts filled with hidden clauses. Just her. And for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, life could go back to normal.